So videos emerged of Professor Chris Whitty, who is the Chief Medical Officer for England and Wales. I was going to say a man who doesn't need introduction, I guess, for international viewers. So Professor Whitty was basically accosted in St James's Park in London on Sunday by two guys who were basically verbalizing abuse at him. Apparently, they grabbed him by the jacket. They were laughing. They were taunting him. The video isn't available on YouTube, or rather, it's still shots, ostensibly not kind of add humiliation to the victim. And the individuals involved have been found and questioned. Apparently, um, it's disgusting. I mean, here's the thing: in any normal circumstances, that would be antisocial behaviour. You get drunk louts, often drunk, and they just harass people. They feel like it's a laugh or they're bored or whatever it is. But obviously, the context here is they've targeted this man because he's a high-profile face of the pandemic response. Um, no doubt there'll be people trying to condone them and saying, "Oh, this is the response to a tyrannical government." The same people will be against any sort of lockdown at all throughout the whole pandemic. More often than not, the same people will be COVID deniers. They'll just disregard the fact that 128,000 of our fellow citizens have died. They'll make stupid statements. Oh, it's just like the cold. Um, I have very limited patience, to be honest, with such people because it's not a question of, oh, well, we respect everyone's view. They are disrespecting people who have lost relatives. Now, I've been fortunate, I haven't lost anyone myself, but I know people who have. And when this thing's over, I'd be surprised if there isn't, if people don't know at least one person, if at least an acquaintance or someone who has either died from COVID or has a relative who did. Um, and I want to be clear here. I'm not talking about people who have expressed concerns about the economic situation. I'm not talking about people who've expressed concerns about other medical issues being sidelined. For example, cancer or other problems. Now, a personal anecdote: my father had a heart attack recently, and it wasn't a case that he was kind of put to the sidelines because of COVID. He was treated, he got world class care, and thankfully he made a full recovery. That was a very worrying time for my family. I thought I would lose my father, but he got world class care at this hospital in Bank outside Glasgow, and this I think it's a little bit of a misconception that other issues are just being put to the side. I think the public feel that is the way because COVID's such a thing. It might be in some hospitals, but that wasn't the case with my father. Um, and I imagine Glasgow, like any city, is going to have a lot of COVID cases. So, um, from a personal point of view, that was a huge relief that that operation went successfully. But when I see these people who gather in their protest marches in London and demand an end to tyranny and say that COVID's fake, it makes me quite angry actually, because I'm thinking it's one thing to question the science, but to be so callous to your fellow citizens, to be so selfish, and think that they're very self righteous. They have this idea, oh, I'm a freedom fighter, and the rest of us are idiots. We're happy to be slaves to a totalitarian government. But this is not an example of totalitarianism. This is common sense practice that's being used all over the world. Um, by democracies all over the world. I mean, it's just really, to me, it's extreme libertarianism. Like basically, freedom means I can do whatever I want. No, freedom means having responsibility to your fellow citizens as well. And in the context of a pandemic, that means there is some common sense restrictions. This isn't an attack on freedom. Yes, there is sacrifice. But there were restrictions during the war as well. If someone, for example, turned the lights on during a blackout, they could have been fined. They could have even went to prison. Why? Because it would have attracted bombers. Now, in this situation, we know that pandemic spread between people, so the common sense is that large crowds are a factor in that. Now, granted, actually manifesting this, actually implementing this is a lot easier said than done. And I've seen examples of people crowding. Um, for example, about a month ago in Newcastle, you'd think there was no pandemic going on. But the thing is, in a country like the UK, which is a liberal democracy, people, these are exceptional circumstances. So at some point, we do need to have a pathway out. You know, it's different than totalitarian states where control over the people is a normal thing. I don't believe this is a totalitarian agenda by the government. I think that's a loony conspiracy theory. I really do. But I do think that the government now, with the vaccine rollout rate being so successful, you know, we're one of the most successful countries in the world in that regard. I think we're in the top 10. I think Israel's number one. Other countries are very high, but we are in the top 10. So that's something we can be proud of. I got my first jab, it was Moderna. I'll be due the second one in August. I had a little bit of pain, by the way, but nothing too serious. Here's the thing about the conspiracy types. They will say, right, let's say you have 1,000 people who get the jab, and let's say 10 of them get sick. They will home in on those 10 people and say, oh, that proves it's dangerous, which is scaremongering. It's just scaremongering. Why do the 10 people get sick? There may be different reasons. It might be that they've got a naturally weaker immune system. It might be a whole range of reasons. But the scaremongering that they come out with is reckless, it's selfish, and it's stupid. And it frustrates me because not just in terms of, I think it's callous towards people who've lost loved ones. I also think that the more that they push this stupidity, you know, insisting that nothing happens, that there should be no sort of measures at all put in place, then the more that you're going to have a peak in infections and the more that measures are going to have to be taken. Having said that, I do think at this point the British people have been very patient. Most of us have applied by the guidelines, and it certainly doesn't help when you have high level hypocrisy. I'm, of course, referring to Matt Hancock. Now, I didn't follow that case closely. Um, I was focusing on other news at the time, particularly the condo collapse in Miami. But as I gather, Hancock was saying kissing a colleague. It's a problem for two reasons for him. Number one, you know, he's a married man, so that's a personal thing. But more importantly, number two, it's hypocrisy. It's breaking social distancing rules, and yeah, you know, and given that he's a senior government minister, it's absolutely right that he resigned. Sajid has taken over. Um, I'll just say this: I'm really not interested in the tabloidy sensational. Oh, Matt Hancock's with a woman other than his wife. The way I've always seen that is that's between him and his wife. That's not a public interest. What is a public interest is the double standards. I.e., if another person done that, they would be fined for breaking COVID restrictions on social contact in the workplace and so on. Um, but you know, this thing with Professor Whitty, I think the two guys responsible, they need to have the book thrown at them. I would even say a custodial sentence, not a long one, perhaps in this case, but I would say maybe a month in jail, a public apology, something like that. There has to be a deterrent with this sort of behaviour. MPs have condemned it. The Prime Minister condemned their thuggish behaviour. He was absolutely right to do so. It's disgusting. I mean, nobody should have to put up with that. Just because Professor Whitty's a public figure doesn't mean he's not a human being. He has feelings, and I'm sure he doesn't like some strangers getting in his face any more than anyone else would. So, you know, people trying to condone it because totalitarian government, so let's harass government figures. Um, I can understand the anger against Matt Hancock, but I would even say Hancock shouldn't be accosted in that way. Hancock should, you know, face consequences for his hypocrisy. He should. It's right that he lost his job. It's also right if he faces a police investigation. You know, if the public is going to be fined and investigated for that sort of thing, so should he. There shouldn't be double standards. But you know, I think what's happening is you get people who are engaging in loutish behaviour and they're kind of using the virus or the pandemic as a cover to do so by saying that they're really freedom fighters. They're not. They're yobs. And I believe that the sort of people who would find some way to behave that way even without the situation. So that's my take on it. But I do think as more vaccines are rolled out, the government really, really does have to have a permanent coming out, even with the Delta variant. Um, we cannot have a perpetual situation. And with all due respect to some in the medical profession and some scientists, they don't have to worry about business. They don't have to worry about mental health. They are focusing on one thing. The government's job, Boris Johnson's job, is to look at everything. So he is facing pressure that they are not. And that's the other side of it. I do think that when's the latest date? July the 19th? I think that should be it. For me, the big thing is masks. I can't stand them. I obey the rules. I understand why they're used, although there's some debate over how effective they are. But I use them on public transport and shops and so on. I have to say, one thing that has happened with the pandemic, it's brought out many totalitarians in one sense. So I was at my local Starbucks recently, and I was temporarily adjusting my mask, and the cranky woman behind the till, this barista, she just has an attitude problem. I've never liked her. She was like, "Oh, you can't come in if you're not wearing your mask." And just really, really bad attitude. Not just please, you need to wear your mask like in a polite way. And I just didn't like her attitude. And then when it came to test and trace, I don't have the app on my phone, but I'm perfectly happy to give my number and my name. And she was being cranky about that. Oh well, really, it has to be on the app. Well, no, other premises have no problem with just taking your name and number. I've been in many coffee shops, so I do think the pandemic has brought out some people with a bit of a power ego. Certain police officers abuse their power. Certain individuals think that because they have a little bit of authority, they can abuse that. So I will say that the pandemic has brought that out, but that's still no excuse for loutish behaviour. Unfortunately, I would say this: I think the pandemic's brought out the best in people. Neighbours looking out for each other. Um, and a lot of compassion from the public and also responsibility and a sort of spirit of the Blitz in a sense. I mean, this is the costliest event in terms of human lives this country has faced in a century. In a century. More people have died actually than all the air raids in World War II on this country. I think it was 67,000 people died in the Blitz and the V2 raids. This is now double that. So that is a staggering figure, and over a shorter period of time. So it's brought out the best in people in that sense, but it's also brought out some of the worst in people. But just to end on a positive note, I think for every idiot out there, there is at least two people who are decent and sensible and reasonable in terms of how they've taken this. Anyway, that's my take. Thanks for watching.